Walaikum salam.
How are you?
Brother Fareed, good to see you. Greetings.
Alhamdulillah.
Welcome to our home. Welcome to our home. Hello. Peace be with you. Or as we Muslims say in Arabic, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Errol Peterkin. It is the month of Ramadan, and I have invited a group of friends over to break fast with us this evening. In Islam, this is an honored tradition. Come in and join us. The word Islam is derived from the Arabic root word salam, meaning peace. Islam simply means to achieve peace. Peace with God, peace within oneself, and peace with the creations of God. This peace, we believe, is attained by voluntarily and completely giving oneself to God or Allah. Allah is the proper Arabic name for God. Muslims believe in and worship the same God that Jews and Christians worship.
It is similar to Christianity and Judaism in that we believe in one God and we follow the same prophets that both Christians and Jews follow, except for the last prophet, which is Muhammad, which we include as a prophet.
Islam is not a new faith. According to our understanding, it is the same truth that God revealed through all his prophets to every people. For a fifth of the world's population, Islam is not just a religion, but a complete way of life. Muslims come from all races, nationalities, and cultures across the globe. They have varied customs, languages, foods, and dress. Even the way they practice Islam may be different, yet they all consider themselves Muslim. There are millions of Muslims who live here in the United States. They come from all social demographics and contribute to American society as entrepreneurs, engineers, industrialists, physicians, scientists, and teachers. Many were born in the United States, others migrated to America seeking a better life. The relation between African Americans, between Africans and Islam, goes back a long, long way. Back to the early years of Islam, back to the Prophet Muhammad in Mecca some 1400 years ago. Muslims consider Muhammad not only the prophet of Islam, but also the example by which to lead one's life. Muhammad was born in Mecca in 570. He was orphaned at a young age. He tended sheep in his youth, and as he grew older, he became known for his truthfulness, generosity, wisdom, and sincerity. Muhammad lived among people who worshipped idols, killed their infant daughters, practiced slavery, and were corrupt to an extreme. Muslims believe that God sent Muhammad as a messenger, a reformer, to them and to all of humanity.
Muhammad ibn Abdullah, peace be upon him, was the last of a long series of prophets. At the age of 40, Prophet Muhammad received revelation from the angel Gabriel and followed basically the same system of monotheism and the golden rule and living a good life that all of the prophets of monotheism have followed.
Muhammad shared God's message of peace and love with his people. With the exception of a few, most of the people of Mecca rejected his call to worship one God. Muhammad and his followers became the subjects of bitter persecution. When the situation in Mecca became intolerable for the early Muslims, Muhammad sent some of his followers to seek refuge from the king of Abyssinia, a good and wise man known for his faith and justice. There, among Africans and for the first time in history, Muslims found peace and the freedom to practice Islam openly.
The African Christian emperor of Abyssinia, known as Ashama, his title was the Negus or Najashi, and he gave them sanctuary, he gave them a place to stay, and he protected them. And what is significant about this is that really it is the first interfaith coming together between the Arabian Peninsula and the African continent. People who are tortured and oppressed are given sanctuary by a believer in God.
The relationship between Islam and people of African descent or Africa, we can go back to the very beginning of the mission of the Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, for we know that many of his companions were of African descent. Most prominent amongst them probably was Bilal.
Bilal was an educated man from Abyssinia who had been enslaved in Mecca. His master was a wealthy trader who hated the Muslims and particularly hated Muhammad. He was furious when Bilal accepted Islam.
They take him, beat Bilal, flog him, and begin to put stones on his chest in the hot desert sun, asking him to renounce his belief now in one God. While Bilal is being tortured for the truth, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ gather, accumulate their wealth, some of the wealthy among them, and attempt to purchase Bilal before he is tortured to death.
Bilal was tortured almost to the point of death, yet he did not renounce his belief. The early Muslims gathered their wealth and bought Bilal's freedom. A sign to other slaves that there is hope, that there are people who will sacrifice their wealth and themselves to secure the rights of those who are oppressed.
The Prophet Muhammad said, anyone who frees a slave, he will be like this with me in paradise. And so, although Islam recognizes the existence of slavery, it applies also the deterrent from taking slaves and the encouragement to emancipate slaves.
In 622, God gave the Muslim community the command to migrate to the city of Medina. One of the first challenges that the new Muslim community in Medina faced was how to call the believers to the mosque for the 5 daily prayers. The Christians used the bell, the Jews the ram's horn. What would be the call for the Muslims? After consultation, the early Muslim community of Medina agreed that a human voice was best. They unanimously agreed that it would be none other than Bilal who would call the believers to prayer.
The legacy of the meritocracy of Islam, that this man rising from this humble state becomes an advisor to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He becomes a close companion. His skills academically are used by the community.
So, a black man from Ethiopia, a former slave, now climbs to the highest position in the community and becomes the first person to call Muslims to prayer.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.
God is the greatest. God is the greatest.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
There is no God but God. There there's no God but God.
أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد
And
أن
that Muhammad is his messenger. Bilal ibn Rabah is a man who has the ability to project his voice. And so he climbs to the highest place up a tree and he makes the call to the people of Medina. And when they hear that call, people assemble and they accept unilaterally, all together, that this is the call of Islam.
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
It is this call of Bilal that one hears all over the world, calling for the belief in the one God.
Now, when you hear it around the world, is the call of Bilal ibn Rabah, calling people to the worship of one God, the belief in all of the prophets, culminating with the last, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
In Medina, under the Prophet's inspired leadership, Islam continued to grow and prosper till the whole of Arabia, including Mecca, came under its fold. At the age of 63, Prophet Muhammad died. Leaving behind the foundations for a community established on righteousness, peace, and equality of all people. Within a few dozen years of the Prophet's death, Islam had become well established among the people of North, West, and East Africa.
As Islam begins to spread across into the West, we have the story of Mansa Musa and his brother, who tell a story, one of a wealthy ruler who is Muslim, who makes the pilgrimage from Mali to Mecca, and his brother who makes a similar journey off the coast of West Africa to the New World.
Muslim geographers and historians were mapping the Americas long before Christopher Columbus. Mansa Musa in 1324 made his pilgrimage to Mecca, and he described his predecessor Abu Bakr, who went into the Atlantic with 2,000 ships. Abu Bakr never returned. And we have hard evidence that came from the presence of Mandinka people who traveled across Brazil. They traveled along the Amazon into Peru, into Panama, up into Mexico, and into the United States. So they proved it without a doubt that you could cross the Atlantic and you were not on the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria.
After the establishment of the United States of America as an independent and democratic nation, a new struggle began. This time the struggle was within America. This was one of the darkest periods of American history, the growth of the slave trade. The slave trade saw the arrival of millions of Muslims from Africa to the New World. Some scholars believe that between 30 and 70% of all African slaves brought by the British to the American colonies were Muslim. Almost all these African Muslims were forcibly converted to Christianity. Yet some slaves retained their Islamic identity. One such slave was Abdul Rahman.
He was a person who had studied in the Islamic universities in that region. Science, astronomy, language, higher mathematics, along with Arabic and Islamic studies. And he is taken as an enslaved person, as the subject of a prisoner of war. placed on a slave ship, winds up in the Caribbean, ultimately sold into slavery in Louisiana, and meets a slave master who can neither read nor write.
Over the decades, the white master grew ashamed of his own ignorance and finally gave Abdul Rahman his freedom. Abdul Rahman's case was an exception, where through the intervention of the U.S. president, the slave prince was finally returned to his home in West Africa.
A slave by the name of Ayub ibn Sulaiman, who was enslaved in Maryland. He was a scholar of Islam, a Fulani man. He memorized the Quran and he wrote it many times, and he was actually freed from slavery and he returned to his home in West Africa.
There are thousands of slave stories that have reached us, stories of great sacrifice made by African Muslims to keep to their faith of Islam.
A man, Yaro Mahmoud, or the man they call Yuri of Maryland, his photograph sits in the library in Georgetown as a man who was an African, who was enslaved, who worked, bought his freedom, was cheated out of his freedom, saved his money again, bought his freedom from selling odd goods on the weekends in what is now Georgetown, and ultimately became freed.
A slave by the name of Umar bin Sayyid, whose biography and writings are found today and are actually housed within different historical displays in the United States. A very interesting character. And what this is showing to us is that there were actually scholars in slavery, that these people were not just common people who were captured, they were literally scholars.
Over the decades, however, slaves began to lose their knowledge of their religion as well as their ability to practice their religion. Islam was replaced by the religion of the slave masters. It was only in the early 1900s that African Americans began to research their African roots and discover their Muslim roots.
With the abolition of slavery, we find that many of the early Islamic leaders in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century actually had their roots from Georgia and the Carolinas and the Caribbean and the region where these Muslim slaves lived. So there is a cultural connection that we're finding between slavery and the rise of Islam that is coming in the end of the 19th century and the 20th century.
Proto-Islamic groups like the Marcus Garvey movement and the Moorish Science Temple, established by Timothy Drew Ali, appealed to thousands of African Americans who were trying to rediscover their lost heritage.
Marcus Garvey, in their International Conference of 1917, asks the question to the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, what should be the religion of the UNIA? The committee returns to Marcus Garvey in the convention and says, we believe because the majority of minority people, black and brown people in the world, religion is Islam, that the religion of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, should be Islam.
In the 1920s, Elijah Poole from Georgia, who later adopted the name Elijah Muhammad, founded the Nation of Islam, an organization that brought Islamic symbols and married them to a black nationalist, anti-white ideology. The Nation of Islam, though not related to mainstream Islam, attracted many African Americans, one of whom was Malcolm X.
We invested 310 years of slave labor, 310 years, every day of which your and my mother and father worked for nothing.
Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little in 1925. In the early 1940s, Malcolm got into crime in New York City for which he finally ended up in prison.
Malcolm started out as a brilliant student in school. He later ran into trouble with school. His mother had a nervous breakdown and they were separated as children, and that had a tremendous effect on him. And many historians say that Malcolm's father was also a follower of the nationalists, Marcus Garvey. And certainly that probably had an effect on Malcolm. But the losing of his mother, the influence of his early childhood led Malcolm to leave and go into the big city of New York, where he drifted into crime, drugs, or what we refer to in the urban vernacular as hustling.
While incarcerated, Malcolm came across the Nation of Islam. He got fascinated by the nation's sense of black pride and discipline. Malcolm accepted the Nation of Islam and took on the name Malcolm X. In prison, Malcolm X educated himself, and when free, he became a champion for the Nation of Islam.
I formerly was a criminal. I formerly was in prison. I'm not ashamed of that. You never can use that over my head. And that he's using the wrong stick. I don't feel that stick. If I take my hand and slap you, you don't even feel it. It might sting you because these digits are separated. But all I have to do to put you back in your place is bring those digits together.
Within the Nation of Islam, he was a radical speaker of truth about the condition of African Americans, which made him a hero, even though many people did not accept the theology of the Nation of Islam.
By the mid-60s, Malcolm X had become the most important figure in the Nation of Islam, eclipsing the founder Elijah Muhammad. The two parted their ways in 1964, and Malcolm founded his own mosque in New York.
Malcolm X's unyielding search for truth leads him to a broader understanding of the universal message of Islam.
While performing pilgrimage to Mecca, Malcolm X once again underwent a major shift in his life. He met Muslims from around the world, black, white, brown, from every race and tribe, and Malcolm realized that Islam was colorblind. It was during the pilgrimage that Malcolm X wrote his historic letter. Never have I witnessed such sincere hospitality and overwhelming spirit of true brotherhood as is practiced by people of all colors and races here in this ancient Holy Land, the home of Abraham, Muhammad, and all the other prophets of the Holy Scriptures. For the past week, I have been utterly speechless and spellbound by the graciousness I see displayed all around me by people of all colors.
There were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans, but were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe could never exist between the white and the non-white.
Malcolm X embraced the true and universal message of Islam, the belief in one God and the finality of the message of Muhammad, the equality and brotherhood of all peoples. And now, with a new name, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, and a new message, Malcolm returned to America.
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. Now, they had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam, perhaps it could do the same thing for him. Assalamu alaikum.
In 1965, Malcolm was killed for his beliefs, and a great chapter in African American history, in Muslim history, ended.
From 1965 to 1975, it becomes legitimate for Muslims in America to be white, black, red, and yellow. And having the benefit of so many immigrants coming from the Muslim world, coming to study in America. The message that Malcolm was giving in the 60s now meets those new students who are coming from Asia and Africa, bringing Islam with them. Now it becomes legitimate. The voices of Islam now are not just the voices of African Americans, but are students from Egypt, from Sudan, from Senegal, from Ethiopia, bringing the message saying that in Indonesia we have Islam, that the American people now get to see Islam in its fullness.
Upon the death of Elijah Muhammad in 1975, his son, W.D. Muhammad, took over the Nation of Islam. W.D. Muhammad was different from his father. He accepted Islam, rejecting the nation's exclusive and racist ideology, and with him, hundreds of thousands of African Americans joined the larger community of Muslim believers.
With the ascendancy of Warithuddin Muhammad, in the context of the Nation of Islam, you find the largest Islamic movement, Islamic, proto-Islamic, however we would label it, many of its members, large numbers of its members being brought closer to the Orthodox or Sunni faith.
As more and more African Americans embraced the universal brotherhood of Islam, Muslim communities began to form across America. American Muslim communities continue to develop and embrace people of every ethnicity, every color, and every background.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Welcome salam, brother.
Thank you very much for
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Brother Salam. Welcome salam.
For inviting us, brother.
Thank you
Allah
very
bless
much
you.
for coming.
Yes, sir.
There are over 8 million American Muslims, 3 million of whom are African American. Islam is very much a part of who we are as Americans, and particularly who we are as African Americans. Our past, present, and future is beautifully intertwined with this great faith. Thank you for visiting with us. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.